You're creating a bunch of freeloaders. Old man, the customer snapped. But Warren Dillard didn't flinch. He just placed the last carton of milk into the young mother's bag and said softly, "Some debts aren't measured in dollars." In that moment, his small grocery store in Hillbrook, Montana became more than a place for bread and eggs. It became a testament to the quiet power of kindness. Because when the world turned its back, Warren didn't. He stood his ground. And what happened next would leave an entire town humbled. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The small town of Hillbrook, Montana, sat nestled between rolling hills and dusty roads. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew your middle name and your grandpa's war stories. And right at the corner of Main and Willow stood Harper's Corner, a weathered little grocery store that had seen decades of quiet service. Warren Dillard, 62 years old, ran that store like it was a promise to the town, to the people who came through those creaking doors, and maybe maybe to the memories he carried. He was a man of few words, the sort who let his actions speak in careful, measured steps. Behind the counter, near the register, hung an old silver star. It was easy to miss, hidden among dusty family photos and faded receipts. Warren never talked about how he'd earned it, or what it meant to him. But some things didn't need to be spoken to be understood. That afternoon, clouds gathered low and heavy. The wind pushed against the glass door with a restless sigh. Warren was stocking a shelf with canned goods when the bell above the door jingled softly. In stepped a young mother, Lucy Porter, her shoulders hunched beneath the weight of the world. Two children clung to her sides, Evan, no older than 6, and little Lily, her eyes wide and watchful. They wore coats a size too big and shoes scuffed down at the heels. Lucy moved carefully through the store, her hands hovering over each item as if calculating every cost. She paused at a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a small bundle of apples. When she reached the checkout, her face was pale, her lips pressed tight as she counted coins in her palm. The total came to just over $24. Lucy's hand trembled. She had $18.75. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking like thin ice. "Maybe just the bread and milk." Her eyes fell to the floor, and Warren watched as little Lily reached up to tug at her brother's sleeve, her gaze lingering on the package of cookies sitting near the register. Warren didn't say a word. He just began to repack the bag, slipping in the apples, the milk, the bread. And then he added the cookies, the ones that made Lily's eyes brighten for a fleeting second. Lucy shook her head, tears welling. I can't accept this." Warren met her gaze and said softly, "Today's a special day for families. These are yours." He placed the heavy bag gently into her hands, his fingers rough but kind. For a moment, Lucy looked like she might collapse under the weight of relief and shame. But Warren only offered a small, reassuring smile. It was enough. They didn't see Margaret Kelly watching from the end of the aisle. Margaret was known in town for her phone always in hand, her eyes always searching for a story. She captured the moment through her lens, the angle just so Warren giving away goods. Lucy's bowed head, the weight of charity clear in every frame. The video went up that night with a caption that bit like winter wind. Harper's Corner, turning hard work into handouts, killing honest business with charity. She filmed it like a scandal, like a secret she was exposing to the world. The next morning, the video spread like wildfire. The comments came fast and sharp. People like him ruin towns like ours. Free food means more freeloaders. Charity isn't kindness, it's weakness. Warren read every word in silence. He saw neighbors he'd known for years share the video, their names beneath angry reactions. People he'd once helped fix a tire or lent a few dollars to, now doubting what he'd always believed, that helping was never a mistake. Lucy didn't come back the next day. Neither did the laughter of the children who once played outside his door. Even the air in Harper's Corner felt thinner, colder somehow. Warren kept stocking shelves, kept sweeping the worn wooden floor. He didn't speak of the video, He didn't defend his choice. When the last customer left that night, Warren stood alone behind the counter. The town's street lamps cast long shadows across the dusty glass windows. He reached up, fingers brushing against the edge of that old silver star. For a moment, he closed his eyes. Memories flickered behind them. Not of medals, but of nights spent in foreign dust, of promises made to men who never came home. He opened his eyes and looked out at the darkened street. No words, no regrets. Just the quiet knowledge that dignity like kindness was never a waste. By morning, the video had reached every corner of Hillbrook. It was playing on cell phones in the diner, whispered about in the barber shop, replayed in conversations that twisted the story into something it never was. Each comment added weight, and each share turned a small act of kindness into a dividing line in the community. Warren kept the store open as usual. He stocked the shelves with canned soup and stacked fresh bread in neat rows. But the air inside Harper's Corner felt different, thin, tense, as if everyone was holding their breath. Mary Gonzalez, who'd bought groceries here for 15 years, crossed the street to avoid the store. Warren saw her through the window, her eyes downcast, her steps quick. It was a small betrayal, but it cut deeper than the sharpest blade. A few minutes later, Richard Lawrence, head of the local business association, walked in. He wore a suit 2 sizes too tight and a look of cautious pity. "Warren," he said, leaning across the counter, "you know the video's killing you." Right? Warren didn't answer. He kept wiping down the wooden counter, slow circles that said more than words ever could. Richard sighed, tapping his fingers on the worn surface. "Times have changed, old friend," Richard said softly. "People don't want to see handouts. They want to see fairness, order, rules." Warren met his gaze, steady and unyielding. "I'm not here to make a show of anything," he replied, his voice calm. "I'm just doing what feels right." Richard shook his head, a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You can't save everyone," he said, turning to leave. "And you sure as hell can't run a business on charity." Warren watched him go, the door closing with a dull thud. When the store emptied again, Warren turned the old radio on low. A mournful country ballad drifted through the quiet, filling the empty aisles with a soft ache. He hummed along under his breath, the melody wrapping around him like an old, worn blanket. As afternoon faded into evening, Cal, the delivery driver, pulled up outside. Warren saw him through the dusty glass sitting in the cab, engine idling, one hand resting on the steering wheel. Cal didn't come in. He rolled the window down just enough for his voice to carry. "Warren," he said, his face tight with something like shame. "I can't drop your order today. Company says it's too risky. They don't want the bad press." He paused, eyes flicking to the silver star glinting faintly behind the glass. "My father served," Cal added, voice softer now. "He would have respected what you did. I just thought, you should know that." Warren gave a small nod, his lips pressed tight. "I understand," he said simply. Cal's shoulders eased at those words, no anger, no blame, just quiet acceptance. He pulled away slowly, leaving Warren standing alone in the doorway. The rest of the day passed in a hush. No laughter from the sidewalk, no friendly chatter at the register. Only the soft click of the radio dial as Warren searched for a song that might feel like comfort. That night, he sat at his little wooden desk in the storeroom, pen in hand. The smell of old paper and coffee grounds clung to the air around him. He wrote slowly, carefully, each word a small prayer on the page. "To my valued customers," he began, "if my actions have caused you discomfort, I accept that. But Harper's Corner has always believed in serving with dignity, and that belief remains unchanged." He read the note twice before he rose, under the glow of a single bare bulb. He pinned it to the front door, a quiet testament to what he stood for. The paper fluttered gently in the night air, soft and unassuming. With the store closed behind him, Warren walked the short distance home. The streets were empty, the moon a thin sliver above the trees. His boots scuffed softly on the pavement, the rhythm of each step measured and deliberate. He kept one hand in his coat pocket, fingers brushing against the smooth, cold edge of the silver star he carried. It was a twin to the one that hung behind the counter, a reminder of promises kept long ago, and the cost of keeping them. He didn't look back at the darkened store. Some debts weren't measured in dollars or inventory lists. Some debts were paid in quiet choices, in acts of kindness no one else understood. Warren Dillard walked on, the town around him asleep and unaware. He didn't need the world to see the weight of that little star. He didn't need them to understand the code it represented. He only needed to know that he lived by it, and that was enough. Inside his small apartment, Warren sat by the window, the night pressing close and silent. He looked out at the faint glow of the street lamps, the empty sidewalks, the soft drift of snow beginning to fall. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he let the memory of that long-ago battlefield wash over him. Not the gunfire, not the chaos, just the faces. The men he'd pulled from the dirt, the ones who'd made it home because he'd refused to leave them. He opened his eyes, breathing in the cold air of the present. In the quiet, he felt the weight of every choice he'd made, and he knew no matter what the world said, no matter how loud the doubts, he would not trade it for anything, because some debts could never be repaid with money. They could only be honored. And in the stillness of that night, Warren Dillard sat a little straighter, the silver star warm against his palm. Tomorrow would come, with or without the world's blessing. But tonight, he was at peace with the man he chose to be. Morning broke clear and cold over Hillbrook. The hush of early winter air felt heavy, almost expectant. And then, without warning, the rumble of powerful engines shattered the stillness. 5 military trucks rolled down Main Street, their tires crunching over frost-hardened asphalt. They parked in a line, big and imposing in front of Harper's Corner. People stopped in their tracks, peeking out from doorways and windows, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. "Are they closing him down?" someone murmured, a note of worry in the voice. A man outside the hardware store set down his coffee, eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. The quiet morning had become a moment that would be remembered in whispers and retold in every corner of town. From the lead truck stepped Lucy Porter. She wore a crisp army uniform, her hair pulled back tight, her bearing proud and sure. Beside her was Travis Porter, also in uniform, the insignia of the 75th Rangers gleaming against his chest. They didn't look like the tired young couple from a few days ago. They looked like soldiers, calm, ready, resolute. Behind them, others followed, boots steady on the pavement. And then from the second truck came a figure that made every head turn. General Owen McCarthy, his silver hair cropped close, metals shining against the deep green of his dress coat. He walked with the authority of a man who had seen too much and carried it all with quiet dignity. Warren watched from the doorway, his hands resting lightly on the worn wooden frame. He didn't move as the general approached, didn't speak as the man stopped in front of him. There was only the faintest flicker in his eyes, recognition, respect, and something unspoken. "Chief Warrant Officer Warren Dillard," General McCarthy said, his voice deep and steady. "It's been a long time." Warren stood straighter, a small nod his only reply. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The cold air held its breath. The gathered crowd leaned forward in quiet wonder. Warren's shoulders squared like they had 30 years before, in deserts half a world away. General McCarthy turned to face the growing crowd outside the store. His voice carried easily, a calm strength that made people listen. 30 years ago, he said, in Somalia, this man saved 7 soldiers. He stayed when he was ordered to leave, and he made sure we came home." The words hung there, heavy and soft, filling the quiet spaces between the onlookers. Warren didn't flinch at the memory. He just let the truth of it stand on its own. No pride in his eyes, just the quiet certainty of a man who knew what he'd done. The people of Hillbrook fell silent. Mary Gonzalez, who had crossed the street to avoid him, now stood in the front row, her hands pressed together. The man from the hardware store took off his cap, holding it against his chest. The general looked back at Warren, his gaze steady. "I was one of those 7, he said simply. "And we've come here today to repay a debt that can never be measured in dollars or goods." Lucy stepped forward then, her voice clear but soft. "Sir," she said, looking Warren in the eye, "when I saw that silver star behind your counter, I told my husband. He knew right away who you were. And he called the only man who could make sure you were never forgotten again." Travis Porter stood silent beside her, his face solemn. He gave a small nod, one soldier to another, and then he reached out and gently laid a hand on Warren's shoulder. It was a gesture of brotherhood, of something shared that most would never understand. Warren didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stood steady, the quiet at the center of a gathering storm of gratitude. General McCarthy turned back to the crowd, his voice rising just enough to carry, "For those of you who didn't know," he said, "this man's bravery wasn't just a moment, it was a lifetime. He didn't boast. He didn't ask for anything. But today, we're here to remind him and all of you that some debts deserve to be honored." The weight of the words settled deep in every chest. People who had turned away from Warren in the past few days now looked at him with new eyes, not as the grocer who gave too much, but as the quiet hero who had given everything long before they'd ever known him. Lucy's children, Evan and Lily, peeked out from behind their father's legs, eyes wide. Even they seemed to sense that something sacred was unfolding. Warren looked down at them and managed a small smile, a flicker of warmth in the cold morning. One by one, the soldiers who had come with the general stepped forward. They saluted Warren in turn, each movement precise and filled with respect. He returned each salute with a quiet grace, his hands steady even as his eyes shone faintly. The onlookers watched in a hush, the only sound the faint rustle of the American flag on the pole outside the store. Mary Gonzalez wiped at her eyes, a hand pressed to her heart. The hardware store owner whispered to his son, "Remember this." Inside Harper's Corner, the shelves of bread and canned goods stood untouched. For this moment, it wasn't a store. It was a place of memory, a place of reckoning. Warren stood in the middle of it all, no longer just the man behind the counter. General McCarthy stepped forward once more, pulling a small, carefully folded American flag from the crook of his arm. He held it out with both hands, his voice soft as he said, "For you, Chief, for what you gave us, and for what you still give this town." Warren took the flag slowly, his hands trembling just a little as he held it to his chest. The weight of it felt like an old friend, a piece of the past come home to rest. He closed his eyes for a breath, feeling every fold, every promise it carried. When he opened them again, the world felt different somehow. The anger and suspicion of the past few days had fallen away, replaced by something older and truer. A recognition of the kind of man Warren Dillard had always been. The general gave one final nod, stepping back to stand beside Lucy and Travis. No more words were needed. The soldiers turned and filed out, leaving behind a store filled with quiet wonder. Warren stood alone at the counter, the folded flag in his arms. He looked out at the people who had come to see, to understand, and he gave them a small, tired smile. It wasn't pride, it was gratitude, humble and unassuming, and for the first time in days he felt something loosen in his chest. The world had tried to make him doubt the worth of kindness, but standing there, surrounded by those who knew the truth, Warren Dillard knew he'd been right all along. One by one, the soldiers stepped forward. Lucy and Travis led the way, their uniforms crisp, their salutes precise and heartfelt. Each gesture was more than ceremony. It was a promise, a wordless thank you for something Warren had never spoken of. Warren returned every salute with the same quiet dignity. No medals pinned to his chest, no speech prepared, just the calm, unwavering presence of a man who had always believed in doing the right thing. Mary Gonzalez entered next, her hands shaking slightly as she carried a covered dish. She set it down on the counter, a tray of warm tamales, their steam rising in the cold air. "Mr. Dillard," she whispered, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry for turning away. You were right. I forgot what matters." Warren looked at her with a small, understanding nod. There was no anger in his eyes, only the simple acceptance of her apology. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the tray, a silent thank you passing between them. Outside, the crowd shifted as a young reporter pushed forward, his camera slung over one shoulder. "Mr. Dillard," he said quickly, "can I get a statement for the evening news?" Warren glanced at the camera, then back at the man's earnest face. "This isn't my story to tell," he said, his voice low but sure. "It's a story about dignity, about kindness that doesn't keep a tally." The reporter hesitated, then slowly lowered his camera, sensing the quiet finality in Warren's words. The hush that followed was thick and tender. A woman stepped up, her hand gentle on Warren's shoulder, and simply said, "Thank you." Her husband mirrored the gesture. No words needed to fill the space between them. As the afternoon light slanted through the store windows, General McCarthy approached one last time. He held in his hands the carefully folded American flag, its stars and stripes neat and solemn. "For you, Chief," he said softly, pressing it into Warren's arms. Warren held it close, the weight of its meaning more powerful than any words. His eyes met the general's, and in that gaze was an entire history, one of sacrifice, of unwavering resolve, of a bond that never truly fades. He nodded once, slow and deep, his thanks written in every line of his weathered face. The crowd began to thin as the sun sank lower. But the visitors didn't come to buy groceries, they came to stand beside Warren. One by one, and they entered Harper's corner, placing their hands gently on his shoulder, some squeezing softly, others simply resting there a moment before moving on. A young boy approached last, his small hand clutching a sheet of crumpled paper. He looked up at Warren with wide, honest eyes. "I made this for you," he said, holding out a drawing of Warren standing tall behind the counter, a small silver star pinned beside him. Warren took the picture carefully, his eyes tracing the bright colors and bold lines. He smiled down at the boy, a smile that was quiet and real. "Thank you," he said, his voice catching just a little. The boy grinned and darted back to his mother, his chest puffed up with shy pride. Warren held the drawing in his hands for a long moment before slipping it carefully onto a shelf behind the counter. It wasn't just a picture. It was a sign that kindness, once given, never really disappeared. As the last rays of sun stretched long across Main Street, Warren stood at the window, the American flag cradled in one arm. He looked at the silver star behind the counter, no longer hidden in the shadows, but gleaming softly in the afternoon light. For years, he'd let it gather dust, a quiet memory of who he'd been. Now, he understood it didn't need to be tucked away anymore, because the real weight of that medal wasn't in the medal or the ribbon. It was in the moments when kindness was harder than silence, when giving mattered more than profit. When the last visitor left, the hush of evening settled over Harper's corner like a soft blanket. Warren turned the sign in the window to close, but he didn't feel alone. The empty aisles weren't empty at all. They held every handshake, every quiet nod, every thank you whispered that day. He took a slow breath, the air crisp and clean. The doubts and the whispers of the past few days no longer clung to him. They had been replaced by something steadier, something earned. Outside, the street was quiet again, the hush of Hillbrook returning like it always did. But in the glow of the old sign, Harper's Corner seemed to stand a little taller, not just a place to buy bread or milk, but a testament to the kind of man Warren Dillard had always been. He locked up for the night, his steps sure and unhurried. The flag was tucked under his arm, the silver star still shining behind the counter. He paused by the door, one hand resting on the worn wood, and let the memory of the day settle deep into his bones. Warren knew there would be other mornings, other challenges, and maybe even other doubts. But tonight, He walked home with a quiet certainty. The world had tried to make him believe kindness was a weakness. But the truth, clear and simple, was that kindness never truly fades. It endures in the hands of those who offer it, in the eyes of those who receive it, in the quiet spaces of a small town that will remember this day. And in that knowledge, Warren Dillard found his peace. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.